Good morning and good afternoon. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. It's my honor today to preside over an event on Belarus. What is going to happen next? This is a kind of a unique hybrid event. We have at the start of the event two congressmen, Congressman Keating, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and Congressman Kinzinger, a Republican from Illinois, who will talk about the importance of Belarus and what the United States must do in the current crisis. Following that, we will have a panel with distinguished members, including David Kramer, a former Assistant Secretary of State, Franek Vyachurka, a prominent journalist from Belarus, Natalia Kaliada, a prominent artiste from Belarus, theater director, and Michael Carpenter, the director of the Penn Biden Center. And with that, I think we have, I'm just looking to see if Congressman Keating is with us. And I don't, oh, there he is. Congressman Keating, over to you. You have the first word.
Well, thank you very much, John. And thank you for inviting me to join you all this morning for this important discussion. On Sunday, August 9th, we all watched with great concern as Belarus held a presidential election that was expected to be and was later confirmed to be marred with significant electoral fraud. What followed were incredible, peaceful protests in Minsk and across the country, challenging the official results after independent exit polls indicated major inaccuracies. These peaceful protests and journalists coming together were disturbingly met with violence from law enforcement, and that's unacceptable. Government forces used barricades, stun grenades, tear gas, rubber bullets, and at times live ammunition. Thousands of peaceful protesters were detained, brutally beaten, and at least 6 individuals are claimed to have died. Several are still accounted for and missing. Yet Belarusians have not been deterred, with over 200,000 Belarusians filling the streets this past Sunday, making it clear they won't be beaten into submission and that they will demand change. As someone who's long been active on advancing efforts around women, peace, security, it was also so powerful to see women-led protests bringing Belarusians together safely and peacefully to oppose this government violence. There must be an end to the violence. Those detained must be released. President Lukashenka must engage meaningfully and peacefully with the citizens of the country. And there must be a process for ensuring that those in charge of the government are there legitimately and have the trust of the Belarusian people. It's important that the world stand behind the Belarusian people at this critical juncture of shaping their future and the future of their country. The voices of the Belarusian people should be heard, and there should be a peaceful process to realize the aspirations of the Belarusian people. And their brave efforts should not be undermined by foreign interference in this process either. Assistance in supporting the work of the Belarusian people is critical. Trying to influence outcomes or undermine the security situation on the ground has no place whatsoever. Which brings me to the role of the United States and the role of Congress. There's bipartisan support for solidarity with the people of Belarus and non-interference with Belarus's sovereignty. You'll also hear from my colleague on the European Eurasian Subcommittee, the ranking member, Representative Kinzinger. We released a joint statement, and there have been others as well who've spoken out. It's important that the U.S. support the Belarusian people in a process moving forward that's free, fair, and legitimate. And the United States demonstrate that support alongside the EU and multilateral bodies that are already there and engaged doing so be steadfast. The steps taken so far by the EU are important, and I also support advancing sanctions alongside and in coordination with our EU partners, and intend to work with my colleagues as necessary to support these efforts to hold accountable the perpetrators of election fraud and violence. It's also important we back up the support with a view to long-term transitions. They do not happen overnight. Belarusians have sacrificed and worked together side by side during this time, and it'll be hard to sustain that energy in the coming months. And if we're being honest, maybe the coming years. It may take that to build a government and a system that Belarusians trust and know is working for them. But as Belarusian people have shown us in the past weeks, they are determined to make change. And I believe it's incumbent on us and the rest of us who share the same values of the rule of law, free and fair elections, respect for human rights. It's incumbent upon us to help and stay engaged and support and stand beside them in their work. So I'm pleased to be here today. I'm glad we're holding this discussion. So I'd like to thank the Atlantic Council and those joining in the panel. And I look forward to working together, going forward and supporting the people of Belarus as they move forward to their own sovereignty. So thank you so much, Ron. Thank you for being this. Thank you for helping us join together with so many countries in the world to speak up in support of the Belarusian people.
Congressman Keating, thank you for that eloquent statement. Now we turn it over to Congressman Kinzinger.
Well, thank you. And I basically will echo everything that Congressman Keating said. So I won't echo it, but just say I agree with everything he said. This is a bipartisan supporting issue. There really is no daylight between the Republicans and the Democrats and standing with people that desire freedom. I think that's a really important thing to know, because in many cases, whether it's Vladimir Putin or enemies of freedom, will always try to point to, look what's going on in the United States and look at the division there. And yeah, I mean, in the United States, it happens to be a pretty tough moment politically, but I'll tell you, I would give anything to live in an environment like that, where at least you can have your voice heard, than in a oppressive, repressive regime. Humanity will not be beaten down. We see over and over again examples of the fact that people will not live under the thumb of a ruler. Everybody has a right to self-determination. That is something that is ingrained and innate in our very soul, that was given to us by God Almighty. And when that is taken away, even if you vote and you lose a vote, you at least know that you had your voice heard. When you aren't even given that opportunity to vote, or you know that that vote isn't real, you will rise up. And that's what we're seeing in Belarus right now. So instead of repeating, what the chairman eloquently said, what I want to talk about is a couple of options that I think we need to jump on, not just as Americans right now, but frankly, as freedom-loving people. I know there's a lot of our friends from all across the world on this call. This is a moment where we need to make it very clear to Russia the consequences of intervention. And not just condemnation, not just resolutions. That's all good. That's nice. I'm for all that. I'll vote for all of it. But I think we need to put together with our allies packages of potential sanctions that will be very permanent and very serious, similar to what we see in Crimea, until the situation is alleviated. We need to put out there to be obvious what happens if Russia decides for full intervention and to oppress the people of Belarus, even at the invitation of the illegitimate government. I think it's also a moment where, as freedom-loving folks, we need to put the death knell into Nord Stream 2. The weakness that Russia has is that they are reliant simply on energy exports. Not simply, but significantly, as we know. We have a real opportunity through green energy initiatives, through discovery initiatives, through obviously US energy strength that we can show our friends everywhere and help with, to become energy secure without having to be reliant on Russia. I know it's a tough discussion among friends. We're great friends with Germany, good friends of ours, right? I am German, by the way. But I think it's a discussion that's worth having about how can we move forward on this issue and really reduce Russia's hammers that they have available in the region. I think we need to continue to speak out to bring attention to Belarus. One of the biggest enemies of this kind of a situation is inattention. If you think of Georgia, when Russia was invading the nation of Georgia, it was all over the news. Now the vast majority of people generally around the world don't think about the fact that Georgia is occupied by Russia. I think about it every day. And I know many of you on here think about it every day, and we're still continuing to work on that. But keeping this on the front line is very important. Same thing in Ukraine. So the bottom line is this, is we support, there are some much braver people than me following me after speaking, and I'm so proud to be part of this, and I thank them for their work. But the bottom line is, I think now is the time where we have to unite, whether it's against the threat from China in some cases, but especially in Europe, the threat from Russia, and just say that we stand together even among our differences. We stand with the people of Belarus and make it clear to Vladimir Putin that he no longer is going to operate consequence free. If you look at everywhere the Wagner Group is, you look at Syria, you look at Libya, you look in Belarus, frankly, there needs to start to be consequences. And so that's what I support. And I support the freedom loving people of Belarus. And I'd actually love to go someday. I've never been to Belarus. Looks like a beautiful place. So look, again, bottom line, Republicans and Democrats stand together on this. Very proud of people when they stand up for self-determination. And I just want to say, God bless you all. And we pray for and hope for a peaceful and positive resolution to the situation. Thanks.
Congressman Kinzinger, thank you for that principled statement. And I'd like to just stress that the bipartisan support in Congress for these policies are very important to their success and something we at the Atlantic Council are delighted to help provide a platform for. And with that, we can move on to our panel. So we have again, Frana Viachurka, Natalia Kaliada, Michael Carpenter, and David Kramer. And if we can pull up, if we have, okay, I'd like to ask the first question to Franek. Franek, what precisely is happening in Belarus? Who is leading the opposition and organizing the protests?
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for organizing this event. Right now, we see the resistance movement on 3 layers. One layer, the very bottom, it's the street protests. Every Sunday, hundreds of thousands of people are gathering in Minsk and other cities of Belarus, and they are coming to the streets not just against Lukashenka. This protest is more in favor of new Belarus, European Belarus, and this is also the struggle for independence. I heard many experts saying that these people don't care, Russia or Europe. I must say that these people already care, and the Belarusian identity is being formed right now on the streets, and Belarusians feel Belarusians as never before. The second level of the protest is the economic protest, and we can see that financial markets already reacted. Working groups, trade unions tried to strike in different cities of Belarus. Unfortunately, many of the leaders of workers' movements are arrested right now, and the strikes had to postpone. But it doesn't mean that they will not try again next week. And the third level of the resistance is the institutional level. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the opposition leader, who is now in Lithuania, she was forced to leave the country after elections. She was blackmailed, most probably. She created the National Coordination Council. And this council consists of more than 1,000 members representing different groups, different classes. Even the top IT companies from High Tech Park, they supported National Coordination Council and joined this group. National Coordination Council selected 7 members, including former ambassador to France, Pavel Latushka, and Nobel laureate Svetlana Alexievich. And this presidium, it is the legitimate group of people, legitimate body that must coordinate negotiations and roundtables between all stakeholders. And let me emphasize a few moments that must be heard by everyone right now. So Putin and Lukashenka, in this situation, it seems they play on one team. We must admit it. And Putin promised all possible help to Lukashenko right now. So this resistance, it's not just against Lukashenko dictator right now, it's also against the whole propagandist machine of Putin. Do you remember Maria Butina in Washington, D.C.? So Maria Butina now is on the screens of Belarusian television, because Russia Today programs are being retransmitted to Belarus state TV right now. So, she appeared there as well. And let's remember that police violence is still continuing. Yes, we have lesser detentions, we have lesser repressions than it was in the beginning, but the police violence must be stopped, but not at any cost. When we discuss, and we are going to discuss today, the possibility of dialogue with Putin and with Russia, we must remember that having dialogue with Russia is very dangerous thing in general. And Belarus does not want to be part of Russian sphere of influence, and we heard it clearly from protesters. One protester had the poster in his hand, Putin, we will figure it out without your help. I will stop here, and I will be happy to discuss.
Okay, Natalia, do you think the demonstrations will be able to withstand the growing crackdown? And what can the West do to protect the protesters and facilitate the right outcome to this crisis?
The protest is able to continue while people see each other standing together, because it's one of the major factors that is helping people to go to the streets, because they finally see that they are not alone, as it was in previous years in Belarus, when we go to the streets, we protest, and we understand that it's not a lot of us. There is a major element that is now social media is playing in this particular movement, and Telegram channels that are not known in the United States, but very popular in Belarus, and Russia became that particular channel of information and help people to be coordinated. But of course, it's a major thing for people in the West and international community to show that solidarity, because unfortunately we've been trying to put that major package of sanctions before elections, because at that particular moment, over the last 2 months, June, July, and the beginning of August, more than 1,000 people got arrested already. And it was major lobbying to put back sanctions against those who already organized repressions. And unfortunately, politicians not been proactive. And Belarus see and observe all of it for the last 26 years. In terms of Belarus, it's reactive. And when you make a warning that we are able to exclude bloody crackdown, politicians are enjoying their summer holidays. So we got what we got. People are killed and tortured with foreign objects. People are horrifically humiliated. Yesterday, just to give you a very small example and understand that all of it continues, even though it's a smaller scale, the main red cathedral, Catholic cathedral, when people been trying to hide from rain, they got into the building, and special riot police closed them inside of the building from outside. We had our friend there, Misha Friedman, who is a major Getty Images photographer, inside of the building. This is a very well-known photographer coming from a Jewish family. For him, it was only one reminder of Nazi time. And when he said that was a silence moment when women started to pray, because everyone thought that they will be killed in a minute. This is happening now in Belarus, and this is what we need to do as international community, to have very clear joint strategy and tactics in order to change the situation. We're now only discussing sanctions when sanctions have to be put in place already 3 weeks ago, because sanctions is a tiny, tiny step in order to change the situation. Secondly, Belarus Democracy Act is still in place. No need to go through legislation. It has to be simply just put refresh button to it. And we need to work on Belarus Democracy Marshall Plan in order to organize proper financial, humanitarian, logistical support to organize peaceful transition of power. It's not possible to allow this particular time to create Venezuela right in the center of Europe.
Okay, Natalia, thank you very much. Michael, your judgment on what is the EU and what is the US doing right now to resolve the crisis and to ease out Lukashenko, and what is your evaluation of their steps?
So thanks, John. I think Natalia just answered your question just now. And the answer is they're doing too little and they're moving too slowly. There's been a lot of statements that are sound like pablum to me. Support, standing with the people of Belarus. Where are the concrete actions? What I think we need to hear, both from the EU as an institution and from individual European heads of state, as well as from the Trump administration, is a clear call for Lukashenko to step down, for there to be a transition of power that is peaceful, that is negotiated. We need to have new, free and fair elections, as called for by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And we need, obviously, for political prisoners to be released, for an end to torture and terror, for an end to repression and hounding of journalists across the country. All of that needs to be spelled out very clearly. It's not enough simply to say in very generic terms that we stand with the people of Belarus. What's happening right now is a massive civic and national awakening that is happening at the same time. It's very reminiscent to me of the Solidarity movement in Poland in 1980. 40 years ago, August 1980, we saw a very similar movement. And we have to have the same level of international support, if not more, right now, because repression is coming. Lukashenko is going to do, he's already doing what Jaruzelski did in December of 1981. He is trying to do it stealthily, covertly right now, but repression is there. Putin has already sent his folks into Belarus. Everybody is expecting little green men, but we've already got the media advisors. We've already got the intelligence operatives. We've already got the plainclothes experts, the political technologists, as they're called. They're already there. And so now the West really needs to sharpen the choice for Lukashenko. It needs to put in place not just 20 sanctions on 20 people, but something that is far more reaching, and it needs to really demonstrate its support for this movement as it matures and as it continues to call for dignity and self-determination.
Michael, you talk about something more than just 20 sanctions on 20 people, something more, something sharper. What do you have in mind?
Well, I think what needs to happen is the West needs to demonstrate to all those mid-ranking people in the nomenclatura that if you engage in repression, you're going to be sanctioned. You're going to be put on a list. You're going to have asset freezes levied against you. Okay? I'm not saying everybody who is in a position of power. Right now, there's a lot of people who are in positions of power who are actually either sitting on the fence or who have declared their support with the protesters. So we need to target that class of people that is engaged in repression, not just a few leaders at the top. And by the way, if we're going to go to the top, we need to also sanction Lukashenko. And the EU, right now, at least my understanding is they're not considering that. So we shouldn't be applying the sort of broad economic sectoral sanctions that, you know, some people have called for example, in the context of what we're doing with Russia, because those would punish the Belarusian people. There's no point in doing that. But we need to get much more broad in terms of targeting the agents of repression in Belarus.
Okay, to be clear, you're talking about Belarusian or Belarusian and Russian agents?
Correct, both.
Okay, good, thank you. David, what is Putin up to in Belarus? And if necessary, do you think he would dispatch troops or little green men who will not be so covert this time to the country?
John, thanks. I think, let's be clear, there, as Mike and Franek have already indicated, there already is a Russian presence in Belarus, both on TV, but also with planes coming in from Moscow with FSB advisors and others. So they're already there, and they had been there even before the election. That said, I think there are two conflicting strains of thought in Moscow. Putin doesn't want to see like-minded leaders driven from power as a result of popular protest movements. So there's a part of him that wants Lukashenko to stay. But as we all know, there is no love lost between Putin and Lukashenko. At the same time, I think there are Russian officials and analysts who are wondering if they play too heavy-handed a role, could that actually backfire? And I think part of this is going to depend on the turnout of Belarusians on the streets, because I don't think actually Moscow wants to turn a country that generally has maintained good relations with Russia, is not interested in hostile relations, against Moscow as a result of any military moves. I'm not naive about this, but I actually think there is a remote possibility that Moscow, if it sees a lot of people continue to turn out in the streets, would decide it's better if Lukashenko left rather than to prop him up and keep him in power. They have to recognize that the protests, as my colleagues have said, have not been anti-Russian. They haven't been pro-West. They have been about Belarus and its future. And it needs to stay that way. Any overt insertion by Russia through military or other means to keep Lukashenko in power is likely to trigger a significant blowback and would backfire on Moscow, I think. And so I think they're better off waiting to see and gauge the mood and attitude of the people in the streets.
Okay, David, thank you. There have been some news stories that members of the opposition have been sort of reaching out to Moscow to start a dialogue. Veronica, I'd appreciate if you would comment on that, and if there's any indication that the Kremlin has tried to establish some sort of contact with the effective opposition.
So far, we didn't hear and didn't see any signs Kremlin wants this dialogue with opposition. Lavrov did comment a few days ago about the Coordination Council, saying that, yeah, they exist, we know, but people were added there without their will. So basically, they don't want to recognize, because any contact with this Coordination Council, it will mean the recognition of this council at the international arena. And this is what Lukashenko wants to prevent. And this is actually what West can do to give international recognition and international legitimacy to the Coordination Council and to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as the national leader. That would serve as the important message to Belarusian people, but also it will weaken Lukashenko's positions at the international arena. Regarding the contacts of the headquarters, Svetlana Alexeyevich, the Nobel laureate, she did tell yesterday, before she was questioned at the investigative committee, like, yes, we have to talk, we have to negotiate with all sides, and also we have to talk to Putin. But that was not consulted with the rest of the council. So I think it was her personal opinion that Putin must be involved. So far, it doesn't seem there is any connection with Russia, with Moscow, with Kremlin, and it doesn't seem Russia wants to be involved in this dialogue with Coordination Council. And perhaps it is the condition of Putin's support of Lukashenko and all their game right now.
Veronica, thank you very much. Natalia, what do you think is going to be the next turn of this crisis, and how do you think this will ultimately end?
It really depends on international community. And I unfortunately will repeat again and again that particular phrase. Because if we allow now for Lukashenko to increase repressions, and he will understand that he is not punishable, and the information that is coming from European Union, it's exactly that information that they will not put him on sanctions list. And what we're getting from EU is that they don't want to put him on sanctions list in order to have an open door. The question is, what open door you could have with a person who started to kill people already openly when the whole world is watching it and torture people? So this is the time now to come up with that particular format. If nothing is working, if OSCE is not active, they don't have director, they don't have general secretary. So what is the working mechanism? If we're talking about Budapest memorandum, we know that the United States and the UK confirmed our independence as Belarusian state many, many years ago. We have Normandy format, where we have Germany, France, but we have Russia there. So the question is to the Western community, world leaders, to come up with new format, because all those formats, they don't work. And humankind develops the way that we're coming up with new ideas. So for Belarus, it's necessary to come up specifically with a new format to help Belarus to get into peaceful transition. That's a very simple thing. But if we continue to express our concerns and condemn what's happened, we need to understand that Lukashenko is not a boy who stole an apple from parents. Lukashenko is a dictator who is in power for 26 years, who kill and torture people. So it means the West finally need to come up with that new mechanism and format in order to stop him. Because we need to understand another very important thing, that if we're able to change situation in Belarus, then it will be the next move, and we're able to change situation in Russia. Belarusian people became a major example of peaceful demonstration for Russian people. And that will be a major signal for Russian population to start to think about changes in their country, because we understand that communist dictatorship or mutated Soviet model will be ended when the Kremlin will go down. So we need to think strategically and globally and understand it's not about safety of Belarusian people anymore. It is about stability in the region. And we need to make stabilization there. And it's about democracy beyond Belarus and beyond European continent. So get the joint strategy together and start to act on it and stop just talking.
Okay, thank you. Speaking about Western activity, Michael, we see that the U.S. sent Deputy Secretary of State Began to Moscow and Vilnius to look into this. Any assessment you have preliminarily on his visit?
Well, I haven't seen this administration take a firm stand, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of calling for a transition to power. I am very impressed with the position that has been taken by the Lithuanian government, and in particular, Foreign Minister Linkevičius, who has been very, very strong in calling for a transition and in standing with the protesters and actually putting resources, specific grants and money on the table to be able to help this protest movement. Aside from the Lithuanians, the Poles, and maybe a few others, there really isn't that kind of strong clarion call for change. And I'll be honest with you, John. I have nothing against Steve Biegun. He's a well-known, respected professional. I didn't see anything beyond rhetoric in his trip. Maybe he achieved something in his talks with the Russians. I don't know, but he certainly wasn't very principled in his calls for what happens next. There was a lot of sort of moral equivocation there. We can't be sitting on the fence here waiting to see, is Lukashenko going to survive? Is he going to go? That's the wrong place to be. We have to be leading. We have to be out in front. And by the way, in terms of what happens next, I think we have to divide this into long-term and short-term. Look, long-term, I think we've already seen the last nail in the coffin of the Lukashenko regime because Belarusian society has woken up. But short-term, there's going to be a lot of repression, I predict. And I don't know whether it's going to last months, years, or even more than a few years, potentially a decade. Look at how long martial law in Poland lasted from 81 to 89. But I do know what Natalia said is also true. It depends on how the international community reacts. And too many countries, including Began and the United States, are sitting on the fence, waiting to see what happens next, rather than driving events forward.
Michael,
John, can I jump in on this?
I was just going to turn to you. Go ahead.
Thanks. The people of Belarus on August 9th, by a majority and possibly by a very sizable majority, decided they have had enough of Alexander Lukashenko. They want a change. And I think it's incumbent upon the international community to embrace that and to recognize that, which means the international community, the West, needs to recognize Belarus will not have a brighter future as long as Lukashenko stays in power. And negotiating with him is not, in my view, a viable option because he will figure out a way to stay there. And in any capacity that he stays there, it's bad news for Belarus. He needs to leave power. He frankly needs to leave the country. And I think the international community needs to support that position. And moreover, any negotiations or talk that the West might have with Russia or frankly with anyone else should not be done without the presence of people from Belarus, with representatives of the opposition. It's critically important that we not talk about some overarching deal with Moscow that involves consigning Belarus to the Russian sphere, whether it's CSTO or the Eurasian Economic Union. We also don't have to close doors to NATO and the EU. Frankly, this is not what the protests are about. It's about Belarus. It's about trying to bring democracy to the country. It's trying to end 26 years of corrupt authoritarian rule. And that should be something we embrace, and we should be tightening the screws as much as possible on the Lukashenko regime and sending very strong signals to Moscow about what the consequences would be for any move into Belarus more overtly than what we've already seen.
All right, thank you. I think it's time now to give our audience an opportunity to ask some questions. We have a bunch of questions already in front of us. We have one from Nika Alexeyeva, who basically says that, of course, Lukashenko does not observe rule of law. The Coordination Council is using legal methods. Should it consider other methods since Lukashenko is not abiding by the rule of law? Natalia, I asked that question of you and Franek as well.
I will just add to what David just said, that we just need to organize a a secure exit for Lukashenko to leave. That's it. There is no other ways around. He must leave the country, and those negotiations, and it's not the right word exactly, negotiations. It's just to make sure that he gets on a jet and fly to the country that will accept him. That's it. And after that, that same moment, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is getting to the land of Belarus. That particular day, she announced next elections that have to be organized within the next 3 to 6 months. And that Marshall Plan, like, as I call it, Belarus Democracy Marshall Plan, have to be put in place in Belarus, but no negotiations with him, no so-called free and fair elections in presence of OSCE if he is taking part in it. We are not able to have any negotiations when he participates in any elections. Otherwise, we will have a Zimbabwe scenario, and he will stay in Belarus for good, and there will be not a single chance for democratic development of Belarus.
Okay, Frana, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah,
one?
definitely. I agree with Natalia. I think, I agree that Lukashenko understands only force, only language of force, and until you created enough pressure on him, diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, financial pressure, political pressure, he will not be doing any concessions and any negotiations. So basically, right now, I see this scenario right now to make Lukashenko leave his presidential chair is the next. First of all, to create enough pressure on him. This pressure will be from inside. The ruble is falling down, the workers striking, the economy collapsing. So the weaker economy of Belarus, weaker Lukashenko is, because Lukashenko's state is very consolidated, and when it is losing um, this form, it just collapsing very quickly. So after enough pressure, Lukashenko will need to make concessions. And these concessions might include roundtables, negotiations, conducting new referendum about constitution, conducting new elections. Even if he will say that I'm agree for new elections and I will participate, it will be loss already for him. He will lose at any kind of elections. If he makes any concessions, he will lose. So the goal is to make him make any concession. When he makes concession, all the apparatus seems the weakness of president. And when they see the weakness, they are looking for the way to side with the opposition with a new power. And the third, to secure the way for Lukashenko to save the face and to leave. He might repeat Yanukovych scenario and go to Russia. He can just go to Qatar with his family. But I think that the least violent scenario is to provide him with the opportunity to save the face. He really wants to save the face. If he will be in this critical situation, in order to not allow him to shoot protesters, he always must have this scenario. And Russia and negotiations with Russia must be also about this critical plan, backup plan to save Lukashenko and his family.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Alex Rafoglu. It says, can the opposition movement inside the country continue without a leader? So, Frana, I'll let you answer this question. Would you say there's not an opposition leader within the country? And can it continue without a leader if there's not?
There are no leaders of protest.
Right.
All the street leaders, Nikolai Statkevich, Pavel Severinets, they are in prison. Many of them were tortured. Sergei Tikhanovsky, husband of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is in jail too. So if I'll go to the streets today with my megaphone, I will be jailed right away. So basically, there is no chance for Belarus to have street leaders. This is why council elected by Tikhanovskaya, they are not street leaders at all. They are negotiators, they are mediators. When they will become street organizers, street protest organizers, they will be jailed right away. The street protests are organized through the messaging app Telegram. There are several channels. One of the most popular is Nechta, the young guy who is based in Warsaw, And there is a group of analysts, specialists, the coordination group behind him, who plans all the protests. And Lukashenko is very angry because most of these guys, they are abroad. Lukashenko cannot stop them. And these guys call for protest. They decide on time. They decide on the format of each protest each week, and sometimes each day. And this protest formally doesn't have leader, but of course there are people behind, and these people are part of Tikhanovskaya's team. They coordinate all activities with other parts of opposition.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have another question from Alex, which might be for David and Michael. He asked about the impact in other countries, other authoritarian countries, of what's happening in Belarus, in particular in Azerbaijan. David, give you the first shot on this. What do you think it is, if any?
I think that some of these dictatorial leaders will draw the conclusion that they really have to make sure elections don't leave anything to chance. They like to use faux elections to provide a false sense of legitimacy. But given the reaction that we've seen and the people of Belarus to Lukashenko's stealing of this election, they may decide that they won't allow really anyone who's a serious candidate to challenge them. There already was a crackdown in Azerbaijan before the Belarus election. There was already a crackdown in Russia before this. They don't necessarily need the developments in Belarus to give them additional incentive to crack down. These are authoritarian regimes, plain and simple, and they don't act all that differently at the end of the day. The means they have to crack down may be different. But I think what's happening in Belarus is incredibly inspiring. And I think it will have an impact on other countries in the region when they see similarly corrupt authoritarian leaders and decide, well, if the people of Belarus can do that, why can't we as well?
Okay, thank you. Michael, several in the audience have commented on your reference to Poland as an example of what might happen in Belarus. One particular question, under what conditions might we see regime change in Belarus if Putin is still supportive of Lukashenko, or is that not possible?
Well, I've actually met with Lukashenko twice, and we've had extended discussions on the topic of human rights. And, I just don't see that Lukashenko has a single reformist bone anywhere in his body. He is philosophically and ontologically opposed to the concept of human rights, not democracy, not just democracy, but human rights. And we discussed this, and I said, look, you're putting yourself in the same corner as like Mugabe and Pol Pot and Mao. How can you take this position? That is his position. And so what unfortunately I see, and if you look at Putin and where he has put his support in recent years, many people have commented there's no love lost between Assad and Putin. And I'm not sure that Putin has all that much respect for Maduro either. But in both cases, it is the precedent of having a strong man removed through popular protests that really angers Putin and worries him about his own future. And so, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a doubling down on repression. I think we are going to see a situation that is very similar to what General Jaruzelski imposed in Poland in December of 1981. But what happened after 81 is that self-governing movement, which is what Solidarity was, it did have a leadership in Lech Wałęsa and others, Tadeusz Mazowiecki and many other people, but it was fundamentally people power that drove it through that dark period of the 1980s. And I think in Belarus that awakening will carry forward through whatever dark period is going to happen next. But as I said earlier, we shouldn't assume that the outcome is also preordained. The international community can influence events here, and Putin, at least in Armenia, has agreed to a change of power that resulted in an anti-corruption activist coming to power, albeit within a country that is completely beholden to Russia for security assistance.
Okay, you might have answered the question I'm about to ask, but I'd like your comment on it, and I also like David's. The question is from Paul Carter. Could Putin countenance a new democratic government in Belarus if it's clear that it's not anti-Russian and has no designs on joining either the EU or NATO? You just cited the Armenian example.
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I'm a pessimist here. For Putin, the clear threat to his grip on power is not EU membership and is not NATO membership. This is a canard that is spread by Western analysts who want to blame the West for Russia's aggression. We've seen it time and again. They don't understand that what motivates Putin to act is fear that democratic change will come to Russia. And so what he sees in Belarus is a threat to his regime. It doesn't matter whether Belarus in 10 years or in 30 years becomes a member of the EU or NATO. That is irrelevant. The precedent is popular will, self-determination wins. And if that happens, that has an implication for Putin immediately. And so that is what he is struggling against. So no, I don't think he can countenance it.
Okay, thank you. Dave, do you want to comment on that?
I share Mike's pessimism, though I think there's a tiny chance. I was struck, and this is thanks to Bob Otto for flagging this for me today. A Levada survey came out today in which Russians that were surveyed, 39% think that the protests are the result of provocations of foreign forces. And by foreign forces, they don't mean their own Russian forces, they mean the West. So this is a narrative that Putin keeps tapping into and exploiting. He will continue to do so, that the threat to us in Russia comes from the West. Therefore, we can't let it happen and succeed in Belarus. Again, I think if saner minds prevailed in Moscow, they would understand that the protests are not anti-Russian. And if they actually did something to intervene or to keep Lukashenko in power, it would backfire on the Kremlin. So it's this competition between Putin's desire to keep like-minded leaders in power and keep blaming the West for provocations versus what really is in Russia's national interest, which should be a stable, prosperous, democratic Belarus on its western border. The same with Ukraine, the same with Georgia. And yet Putin doesn't like stable democracies along Russia's borders. That's a big problem.
Okay, thank you. We have a question for Franek from a distinguished member of the Lithuanian Parliament, Andris Kubilius. He asks, do the people of Belarus understand that Lukashenko is staying in power in part or in large part because of Putin's support?
No, I think majority of people don't understand this. And for a majority of Belarusians, it was a huge discovery that we are living under dictatorship for 26 years. There was a social contract. Government, Lukashenko, guaranteed security, stability, while people are not involved in politics. These social contracts existed not just between the ordinary citizens and the government, but between entire sectors, like high-tech IT sector, never was involved in politics before 2020, but and right now it's the major driving force of the protest and all this technological advancement that helped this protest to happen. I think a majority of people thinks that they were cheated for a long time. They realized that all these programs, all these narratives they were fed from state TV were lies. Now you can post on your Facebook videos from 2006, 2010, and for many people it's shocking. You know, they are reopening the history, the last 30 years of Belarus history again. And they were living like in parallel worlds. And these 2 weeks of protests, they made changes as perhaps 20 years of Belarus history didn't. So it's quite amazing. And it was everything enabled by internet and social media, of course, because they help to amplify messages and ideas, content. And it's spectacular how babushkas from my neighborhood, you know, they're discussing on Odnoklassniki how bad is Lukashenko. And it started from COVID, because during COVID, television was lying. And even these babushkas, they subscribe to Viber chats and Telegram chats to know the truth. And since then, they're still reading the same chats, but now not about COVID, but about protest, where to go and what posters to take with you.
Thank you, Franek. Natalia, you may want to jump in here too, but I have another question for you, which let me give you the question first. Do you think that as a result of what's happening now, the reliance of Lukashenko on Putin, Lukashenko might be willing to make further concessions in terms of the State of the Union between Belarus and Russia?
They will not do that now at all. So it was that particular card that Putin was trying to make Lukashenko to sign right before the election.
Correct.
And it didn't work. And Putin also, as you know, he never supports weak candidates. He made that mistake with Assad a few years ago, but then he didn't repeat. It's not in his nature to support the horse that is limping. And for Putin currently, the situation when he clearly understands that Lukashenko in a very weak position. But what we could do, because economy is very weak currently in Belarus, and in terms of what's happening with bank system that is linked to Sberbank in Russia, if we're able to have proper pressure on Russian Sberbank and Americans could do it easily, then we could weaken his economy even quicker. So this is the situation where we need to think not about Lukashenko reliance on Putin. And even though today Putin already announced that we have prepared a group of law enforcement, they're prepared, they're ready, but we don't think that we will intervene because there are no anti-Russian mood in Belarus, but we're ready to intervene. So he is saying that get prepared, we could do it, but of course there will be no military invasion now because it doesn't make sense for him currently. So we need to think strategically and logically how we from the West could pressurize Lukashenko economy, and it could be done through Russian Sberbank easily.
In other words, you're suggesting Western sanctions on Russian Sberbank as a way to pressure Lukashenko.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a comment from one of your colleagues in the opposition, Vadim Prokopiev, who says that, quote, personal sanctions are not enough. We need something stronger. It seems that you would agree with that, at least with this idea, Natalia.
Personal sanctions, I will sadly repeat myself and say that I feel it's already too late. I can't understand why they are not yet in place. I can't understand what America and EU are waiting for.
I agree with you on that, but you still would like to see them, even though they're late, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Put it in place now. So it will be at least a signal there. But we need to be very careful when we talk about economic sanctions, because when we talk about Belarus Kali, such factories, it's we need to understand that those workers, they are on strike, and we need to find ways how to support them. So we need to think again, like strategically. So we have to have a very clear strategy and tactics. What kind of sanctions we need to put in place and against who? It will be very much enough if you have 2,000 at least people put on sanctions. I know it doesn't work in terms of kind of long lists, and we need to be realistic what names could be added there. But still, as Michael said, those middlemen, they need to understand that they must answer for what they're doing. And just very quick example, when I was in jail in 2010, going through also not an easy experience, and riot police who was beating me up in jail said, do you understand, even when you come to power, we will be still here? And this is the scary moment. That's why we need to think how to add their names, and they will answer those things now. In terms of economic sanctions, we have to be very careful, but we have that mechanism of economic sanctions put on Russian Sberbank. We need to stop selling any euro bonds because euro bonds are there. And it is a big surprise that it started to happen a month ago before elections. So there are mechanisms to have a major pressure, But think about Moscow. Think about Sberbank. It will be much tougher move.
Hey, John, can I just, I know we're running out of time, very quickly. Last week, Lukashenko awarded several hundred OMON troops for their efforts at cracking down on the protesters. He then provided the West with the names of the people who should be sanctioned. And what the West should be doing is both offering incentives for people to peel away from the regime, undermining it, while at the same time making it clear there will be a price to be paid if you support Lukashenko's repression.
Michael, that's actually, David, that's a great idea. So what are we suggesting as inducements here?
There needs to be accountability and justice for the crimes that have been committed, the torture, the beatings, the brute force. But at the same time, we should also make it clear that now is the opportunity to decide, do you want to be on the right side or do you want to be on the wrong side? And people should understand that the vast majority of the population is on the right side, and the forces that are propping up Lukashenko within Belarus should be on the majority side, not on the minority.
Okay, we have a hard stop in 1 minute. Michael, you have 15 seconds for your last comment.
I agree with all of the foregoing. We need to sharpen the choices in Moscow, in Lukashenko's own mind, and also, most fundamentally, demonstrate solidarity with the people out on the street, and especially within the nomenclatura, those who are wavering. They have to know that this is a movement that will succeed. They need to be on the right side of history.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid our time is up. I'd like to thank our distinguished guests for a very exciting conversation. And I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in. We'll be doing more in the weeks to come on what's happening in Belarus. And thanks especially to our congressmen who came and advocated strong policies in support of what's happening against the Lukashenko regime. Thank you.
Thanks.